super collider, Reverend Durley.
How many people are excited? How many people are excited? You know, as I sat out there in the audience, one of the things that I said to Heather, I said, you know, this is so nice. But you know what? Get this thing behind me out the way so the people over here can see these folks up here. I was sitting over there, and I didn't even see them. I like to look at somebody in the face to see if they're really real. Looks like a real group to me. And you can see us all right here. You see the panel over here? So we want to do, so to this time, you know, there's interesting. Anytime you do a conference, you always want to know, how do you evaluate it? How do you know that you're successful? And a few minutes ago, I said to Heather, listen and hear the success of what you all have planned, and the discussions, and the dialogue, and the sharing of information. When people don't get something out of a conference, and you take a break, they go to the bathroom, they go make a call, they turn it, they on the cell phone. But you all were exemplifying what this was supposed to be, getting you involved, finding out what this is. And in the Greek, there are two ways to tell time. Chronos is one way. Chronos means that there are 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute. And we said we'd start at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock chronologically. But today, all of you who are here, this is a Kairos moment. Kairos, which means there are no minutes, no hours. It is divinely inspired by something greater than each of us. This is a Kairos moment. This is a Kairos panel that brings so much to the effort. And as moderator, I'm going to ask one question. Then I want you all to talk among yourselves. The question about how do we take all that we've heard today? How do we take all that we've learned? Your experiences, your best practices, your less practices, and how do you begin to say, how do I involve the community? I want to say one thing to you. As I look out over this audience, you have renewed my faith. I stopped going to conferences because they talked about minority involvement, but I never saw any minority. They talked about low-income communities. I never saw any low-income communities. But this is a tribute that the diversity here, the ideas that were expressed, don't take this moment for granted. This doesn't happen. Had it not been for Heather and Garry, I wouldn't have come. I couldn't go to another community where they talked about community involvement and wasn't no community. Huh? Am I talking to myself? Okay. So this is what I want to commend not only the planners, but all of you who are here, and particularly those of you who've been so honest with your explanations. How do you get community folks involved? We could talk about funding and all of that, but the excitement, I love what Jazz said about getting the policy and the policy and the legislation involved. We cannot do it unless the business community, the political community comes in and to listen to the community, what the doc was saying and all of you said. So just among yourselves, I'm not going to jump in. I got a list of 10 questions here. I'm not going to ask one, because I want you to talk among yourselves to say, this is what we've done. And then can you talk about some of your, I won't use the word failure, but some of the things that didn't go as well as you thought they should have gone, and why didn't they go that well, and what would you do the next time to make it go a little better? It's open. This is our distinguished super panel. Give them a hand. They're going to talk. Let's listen to them. All right, panel, go for yourself.
I love to start with what we did wrong or what we did not have. I come from a very conglomeration of small communities. Hopkins, Eastover, Gaston makes up a community called Lower Richland. We didn't have the capacity for grant writing. It's a rural community, low-income community, a majority minority community. We just didn't have that capacity in place, where the other parts of Richland County had all of that capacity. So even the first grant that I did for EPA, colossal failure. And I just would say that's mine, not putting in the time, first federal grant in this area. And so how we took that failure and changed it into a positive is that we went straight to our political leaders. And we just said, listen, we got this good thing and this good partnership going along with DHEC and with the University of South Carolina. We just need some funding. And I'll tell you, our senator picked up the gauntlet and provided us with $300,000 to make sure that what we didn't get in the EPA grant, we then had funding to do, and the initial money came from just an allotment from our senator. And then, of course, we went back and completed that EPA grant, so the next opportunity, we will submit a really good grant. So just some of the things some of the things that we learned, we used what we had, and that was a good relationship with the political leaders in our small community. One thing about a small community is that you have access to your senator. You got access to your representative. You got access to your county council person. I work every day with the mayor of our small community. So we used what we had to say we weren't going to allow just the fact that we didn't get federal funding to stop us.
I think another thing is just sharing of power and resources. Recognize that, if you work at an institution, or an institution that has access to resources and relationships, it's more than just about, coming in with potential solutions or ways to, assist and support, but what does an actual authentic relationship look like when you're truly sharing, your resources and relationships? I mean, are you sharing the relationships that you may have with funders for the projects that you have, with the communities that you're working with? Are you helping them to navigate, in those spaces? That's really important. And I think those are, a part of this is always asking yourself, looking in the mirror and asking yourselves and your board, those questions. What does your board look like? What do the advisors to the projects or the organizations that you work for look like? If they don't have people that look like the people that are being impacted, then that's problematic, because those people are going to have the closest solutions. And can you help them build those relationships, like you say, with those politicians, with your senators, with your state representatives, the council people, and so on and so on. So, if anybody else wanted to.
Just quickly for me, making assumptions about who your target audience is, making assumptions about what they perceive the problems to be, making assumptions that you have all of the answers to their problems, when in fact, if they experience the problems, they probably have the best solutions to the problems. They have the key to the corrective action. For me, it's making poor assumptions about what they know and what they want, what's important to them.
I think to that point as well, yes, don't go in with assumptions, but also even if you have some concept of what you think might be the arena, the sphere of ideas, when you get in there and you hear that it may be from the community directly and it goes off in a different direction, I think you have to be there and support that. Because I think that's kind of the fundamentals of building a longer term relationship. We are building relationships and it takes time. And, as much as I wish that the climate issues would slow down so we could really take the time of stuff we should have been doing decades and decades ago of building relationships with one another, that is just where we're at. And if we're gonna really be successful, we have to start, I think, fundamentally still with those relationships and building that. And a case in point, I would say, is that with the case that Dawud and I were speaking about, Hudson Hill, we went in there talking about flooding, talking about these sea level rise sensors, and they said, yeah, that's an issue, but you know what's worse is the air quality issues. How do we get some purple air monitors? How do we start teaching the residents here about heat, humidity, particulate matter, and air quality sensors? So we pivoted. We did not keep pushing because, that was not what they wanted.
And I'll tag onto that, and I like the focus on relationships here. I think Dwayne DeFries mentioned that earlier today. Definition from a textbook we use in one of my courses about the definition of disasters. It's a vast ecological breakdown of the relationships between humans and their environment. And if there are broken relationships between us and each other, between us and the environment, our systems economically, educationally, et cetera, law enforcement, we need to be doing the work to build those relationships. And oftentimes, it doesn't take a grant to do that, to build relationships means meeting together and convening together. Yes, you do need resources and a space for that, but I don't think it often takes that much work that we think it, or that much resources and financial backing that we think it does to build relationships. And the inherent challenge of the grant work is where we're one and done. We're there for 3 to 5 years. We have our deliverables, and we parachute out. And that parachute scientist stigma, reputation that we've had in academia is really hurtful for our communities. And so the work that we do in South Carolina with our communities is a long-term presence. That relationship has been there since Skip mentioned the expansion of the port in Charleston and Lamsey's creation since the early 2000s, and we've had multiple grants together and continued to focus on that work. And Mr. Reese and I had a call last Friday, and that was the very topic of our conversation, that it's a long-term relationship. So avoiding the parachute scientist pitfall and the resources needed to build relationships, does it require a $5 million NIH grant? I don't think so.
That is a key point that we discovered at the Harambee House. The building of relationships and the communication over time and consistently with the communities that, in our case, have felt ignored and dismissed for decades. That communication builds a level of trust that then allows for further communication and then the building of bridges and other work to begin to establish connections again. On the west side of Savannah, there was a reticence about connecting with academia. Well, over the last 4 years, because of the work that Harambee House did specifically with Hudson Hill and West Savannah communities, now those two communities and Woodville and Ogeechiton are developing a real strong relationship with Georgia Tech, reestablishing a connection with Savannah State, and the benefit of that is for community members to begin to express and give their ideas on solutions, and then have these academic institutions come back with the expertise to begin to work with those communities to build these solutions that have a permanent effect. So that building of relationships, which does not involve money, but down the road can bring in money, that's a real key issue.
I want to piggyback on a couple of things that Robert and Dan said about really flexibility. The E.J. Strong Project envisioned having 4 training classes in person, 40 people. They finished the program after 2 years, have a certificate, declare victory, and we did what we said we were going to do. None of that happened. Okay. First of all, it was COVID, so in person, that went, and so we had to pivot to a hybrid format. We did in person and virtual. We also did a lot of what we call mini virtual workshops, where we were 100% online, covering information we just didn't have the time to go through because there's a lot to think about. Also, the 40 people thing, that we, at the end, I counted as about 150 people were involved in this project because we wanted to, limit it, but it seemed to connect with a lot of people, and it's like, how do I get into this class? How do I participate? What can I do? Wasn't there the first class. What can I do for the second class? So because of that, we said, just let, if you're interested, that's good, just build on that. And like with you, Robert, were you there at the first class? I don't think so, but here he is on the stage. So to have that flexibility and not be so rigid is important. And another thing is persistence. You may not get what you want when you want it. There's a particular thing I would like to see in South Carolina, what we call a one-stop shop. As the environmental justice coordinator, I am involved in a lot of different things, transportation, housing, not only just environmental things. And I see a lot of the same people over and over again. And the way we set up our system here is you put in application for this and you put in application for that, put in, and you're giving the same information to different agencies, but you have to take the time to go to a particular place and know that it exists to put in your application for money. And I don't think we need to do that. It needs to just be one place where you put your information and then it gets sent to the relevant agencies. So I would really love for us to have something like that in South Carolina, if not the nation. I believe the colleges tried to do that with the one application. I think that will be beneficial for everybody. It save a lot of time and effort. But yeah.
I want to. I completely agree, Keisha, with your point about flexibility. I think it is critical to doing this kind of work, and I find it also to be a challenge in terms of funding. I think a lot of the grants that, at least in academia, we're going after, you need to say what you are going to do and the deliverables that you are going to have at the end of this project, and if you're funded, that's what you're responsible for. A lot of grants don't really allow for the kind of flexibility that I think is really important in doing this kind of work. And I don't know, I know that certain funding allows for that flexibility, but I think I would like to see more funding opportunities that allow a little bit of more of that kind of thing, right? More of the, we're gonna work with communities and determine what the specific deliverables are going to be at the end of this grant. Or stipends to fund community members is another one that is, in my experience, really challenging to work into grants. There's not an easy mechanism to say, we want to fund community members who come to these meetings. I think the whole funding, sort of public funding at least, system, I would like to see some changes to allow more of that.
And I'd like to add too that, one of the projects that 100 Miles has been working on, and Jen has been working on, is warehouses, right? So you have communities like Monteith in the city of Fort Wentworth that are now surrounded on three sides by these huge, gigantic warehouses, which is connected to the port expansion, right? And so good and bad, right? So there are a lot of good things that are coming with the expansion, but there are a lot of bad things that are coming in regards to the planning, which directly impacts communities, which directly impacts, resilience work. So knowing how to be in a space to help in those challenging times when you're working with communities, right? Because, when you think about the port and the excitement around it and officials that are very much in support of it, people don't think about the negative consequences for unintended consequences, so be it, to communities that have these, massive structures that are now sitting there that their local officials allowed, but that directly impacts them. What about water usage? All these things get environmentally impacted. We have an EV plant coming, but what about the plan for the waste that comes from that plant? And you've mentioned that before. And those things directly impact those communities and those spaces. And sometimes what happens is, the plans just do not include, contributions from the people that get most directly impacted that are in that space, and just really thinking about that. And right now, just dealing with that alone, there are communities that are just in these tight spaces, and who's going to be there to support them when they're saying, this is negatively impacting us and impacting the environment that, that they're living in too. So just, thinking of things differently. And I think in order for things to get better, you're going to have to start doing things that you don't usually do. And that's the only way you really, can get the change that, that is needed. Like when we talk about the funding, like when we talk about the fact that you're talking about grants, well, it's great that you have all these opportunities to apply for these grants, but what if, the capacity? I've seen some of these applications and I'm like, okay, who's got capacity to do that? So it's significant challenges. So just some things to think about.
For me, it's listening. Hearing just proves that your ears work. Listening is a deliberate effort. Listening means that you are other people reflected. You are purposely listening for what they're saying so that you can give them feedback based on what they said. Sometimes we hear what people say, but we don't deliberately listen. So we walk away. We've had a long conversation. They've talked to us a long time. We don't take anything with us because we weren't focused on them. We were focused most times on what our rebuttal's going to be, what our reply's going to be. And the truth is, true listening means that you other people centered and you're focused on the other person and you're really listening to what they say. And I truly believe that most problems, the solutions are right in the room where the problem is, but we fail to listen to what's been told to us. We fail to absorb the information, give good feedback, that kind of thing. So and when you're sitting in a room and you already have your agenda plan, this is what we're going to present, and there are other people in the room talking about something totally different, you have to be open to listen. Just stop. Be willing to move away from your agenda and listen to what's important to them.
Listen, learn, then lead. The 3 L's. I want to ask a question for you all to discuss, and it's something that's over all the years that we write grants and we wonder how can we get it in. The question, think about this. How can we just address existing power imbalances and inequities to ensure marginalized voices are heard and their needs are met in planning and implementing resilient strategies? We realize that the powers are imbalanced. So what do you do to get people involved so that their voices are not just heard, but then how do you activate them? And all of you've had to do that when you've worked hard to get all of the grant writing and all of the letters of references, and then all of a sudden it's just stacked against you. And in that, I think all of us need to know, when you reach that wall and you're frustrated, disgusted, ready to throw in the towel because of the imbalance of power, what resilience do you have inside of you to say, I'm going? A lot of people say, Durley, you're strong. I tell them, I am not strong. I'm resilient. That means I'm going to keep getting up. Keep getting up. Each of us are strong, but there's some resilient nature in a community leader. So when the imbalances of power come in, what do you do to encourage the community to not give up?
For me, I had to show by example. I had to lead by example. So now the first thing is about the resiliency piece is, for me, this was my community. It was the place in which, these people reared me without understanding. I didn't know this, but my maternal family land, about 100 acres, sits contiguous to the Dominion coal power plant. I didn't even recognize that plant as a child. We'd go to my great-grandmother's house almost every Sunday after church. We'd have dinner. I'd see the smokestack and didn't understand anything. When I go off to college and come back, I recognize, oh my goodness, we grew up in the shadow of a coal power plant. And Keisha brought folks out there to test the land. This is after I'm old enough now to understand my obligation as a citizen and my obligation to the people who reside in that community who still may not understand it like I do, because I've got a different kind of educational background. So my commitment to my community is what kept me getting up. But then also, I realized I could not keep going out and telling the community, you need to join some of these county boards, if I wasn't on the county board. I'm like, I kept going out telling people to do so. So then zoning became a big issue in the community. Every meeting, it was a zoning. I said, you know, I'm gonna join the Board of Zoning Appeals. The Richland County Board of Zoning Appeals, now I chair the Board of Zoning Appeals. Now I can explain things very differently, but can also advocate very differently for my own community because now I sit on the board. And so you'll find people in the community that have this kind of love for learning and wanting to know and wanting to be the kind of the spokesperson. You got to kind of find those folks just like you all have found. Listen, it's not by chance I'm sitting on, and I'll tell you something else, is I'm sitting on this panel with African-American men, is what I've noticed. And so you see these people that are in the community that are really wanting to do it. People who, if you allow yourself to listen to how people kind of interpret who we are in our community, you would never believe that you'd have 4 African-American men who were really advocating on behalf of their communities because you think we don't exist. Really. And so you'll find the people in there, and then you find those individuals, 1 or 2 individuals, and then you help them navigate the process, and then they will find a way to communicate it back. I take some of these big issues, some of these things that sometimes are way above my head. I learn what they are, and I help to communicate them to my community who I don't see as deficient. I see they speak a different language. And so I'm helping them to understand it. And once they understand the issues, they can come back to tell me exactly what it is that they want. And I can make sure I go back and communicate that. And for that reason, I'm running for the House of Representatives in South Carolina. And I'm taking these issues with me.
I guess for me to answer that question is I'm fortunate being from, a place like Sapelo, and even St. Simon's, but Sapelo especially, I know the stories of my ancestors. And I know what people went through, or had to go through, for me to walk on the very ground that not only that they walked on, but that they survived, that they suffered on, that they died on. That means something. That's powerful and impactful. So for me, I know that for me to exist and be here, that there were sacrifices and things that they went through, and I know their stories. And that drives me to my core. When I, think about, and I always add this to justice, what happened to Ahmaud, that drives me to my core. And it brought even a heavier responsibility that I always tell people that we all have to give. There is no option. There is no compromise. This has to be done so that we can make a better place. And that is the only way we're going to do it. So you have to find, what is that thing that drives you? And for me, I'm fortunate because I can look around every day and see it. I can look, down, I can look up, I can look out into the water and the ocean, and they drive me. They're the reminder for me, so.
For the power dynamic, I'll go back to my spider web. Beyonce won't talk to me, but she'll talk to her mama, right? And mama talked to Charlemagne, and Charlemagne to talk to his wife, who talks to Monica, who I work with at DA, right? So I think to try to balance the power, you have to use your relationships and connections like you did for Lower Richland to fund the citizen science efforts. The path that you walk, if it's, stops, then if there's a will and there's a way, go a different way. So I think what I'm saying is don't take no for an answer if it's something that you want. In regards to persistence, sometimes, yes, I feel like I'm peeing on a forest fire. But at least I'm doing something, right?
Did you get that, Brittany?
I think something I forgot to share when I had an opportunity to present on our work with Rosemont and our OHH, Oceans and Humans Health project, as well as EJ Strong. In using sound science to make noise, you're empowered with that data that you own. And then rather than going to a community meeting with emotion and yelling and screaming, when you address that power dynamic in that community meeting with data in that sound science, you're making noise louder, right, than that emotion. And that's something that we've gleaned from our community members, especially in Rosemont. And so I forgot to share that earlier, but glad that I had an opportunity to share it again this time.
That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to the meetings with the data and still yell and scream, though. So that's okay.
One of the things that made me think is the conversation around data and whose data or who owns data. And I think that's something that we have certainly wrestled with is whether it's from your electric utility and energy efficiency and energy burden down to health data and everything else. And it's like the data doesn't exist without the people who the data is measuring and the environment they're measuring. And I think I would love to see that discussion get more robust and actually start to flip that, because that does get to the power dynamic some too. Because this isn't, whoever studied it, it's not their data. This is the people who generated the data. It's their data as well. Or at least having a free way for everyone to access it, I think is quite important.
Well, from personal experience, we did lose some data in our early research because the researchers left the institution. And so we have to assume that the data left also. We no longer have the data. But that won't ever happen to us again because we have an agreement with every organization that we work with, an MOU that says the data belongs to CCRAB. CCRAB, and I didn't tell you what CCRAB was. CCRAB is the Charleston Community Research to Action Board. What we do is research on environmental justice issues. And we have our own storage facility, in the cloud. So the data stays, the status stays with us. We have cloud-based data storage, and we have data storage at the medical university. So, and it's very important because when you lose the data, you lose the research. So you have to keep that in mind.
Every single response to this particular question has impressed me because it has looked at particular aspects of the current status quo, how things are done today and how they have been done for generations. So we're really talking about changing that status quo. And looking around the room, all of us here, this is a extremely important convening, and I'm really enjoying this discussion, but what's missing? One thing that's missing are the people we're talking about, because right now, they're working. They can't leave work and come to this convening, sit down, hear these thoughts, and also include and express their opinions. So we, individually, socially, and collectively, we've got to begin to look at how can we change this particular dynamic so that this convening can happen in the evening or on weekends, so that the people that we're talking about, the communities that are impacted, the so-called EJ communities, can participate and be a part with us on finding these solutions.
This is why it's absolutely essential that the authenticity of those sitting on the stage can try to represent those who have to work every day. I've just been by the facilitator, said that we have only 2 more hours left for the panel. So given the instructions, I think it's, you know, as I look at this panel and look around the room, what hit me as I was listening is that, you know, we've come a long way from the back of the bus. We've come a long way from the back of the bus when you can sit here in this beautiful place and listen and respect one another. And I've often said to people, the key to anything that we accomplish is the word communication. And communication is predicated upon 3 primary principles. Do we understand each other? Can we respect each other? And the last is something that we heard over and over. Do we trust one another? If I don't understand you, nor respect you, and particularly respect your difference, we're all different in that. I am so glad that I didn't marry me. I'm so different than my wife was. We were married 54 years. She died 2 years ago. But I was completely different than that lady. And that's why we stayed married. So respecting the differences, understanding each other, and most of all, developing the kind of trust. And I'd like to thank each one of the panel members, and you've given me something that I'm leaving with. I don't ever go anywhere else I don't learn something. You know, the end of my next speech, you know what I'm going to say? If all of us pee together, we can put the fire out. Hello? If I can, you can. Thank you, panel. Let's all get ready. If I can, you can. God bless. Stay strong. Don't bend, don't bow, don't back up, and don't break.
All right, Super Collider, yeah. Woo, let's hear it from again. I can, you can. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We got a larger-than-life panel with a huge moderator here and such. He's just done an ample job from kicking off this morning, stayed with us throughout the day, and now anchoring us this afternoon. Let's give it up again for Reverend Durley. Incredible, incredible. And we heard the words from the panel today. Persistence, flexibility, giving us the options with funding, coming together, building trust. Okay? These are the building blocks that the panel wants you to take with you today. Again, thank you so much. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you, Garry.